I want you to just close your eyes for a second.
Okay.
Just imagine the chaotic, terrifying clash of a distant battle. You know, the sound of iron hitting wood, the screams, all of it just slowly fading away.
All right.
And then imagine that sound being replaced by the overwhelming, almost deafening noise of a massive ancient metropolis.
Like a real shift in the atmosphere.
Exactly. We're talking echoing stone streets, 500,000 voices, huge bronze bells ringing out across this vast golden city.
It's quite the contrast.
It really is. And then finally, imagine all of that grandeur fading into total silence, leaving only the quiet, haunting sound of the wind blowing across a muddy, blood-soaked field in England.
It is an incredible sequence of environments.
Yeah.
And a really jarring one, honestly.
Yeah, it's wild. And I want you to picture those three scenes right now, because today we are talking about a man who somehow lived like 3 or 4 completely different lifetimes, all packed into one single biography. We're talking about a wounded teenage exile on the run for his life. We're talking about a staggeringly wealthy, elite mercenary commander operating down in Constantinople.
All right, a massive jump.
Totally. And then a brutal, uncompromising Norwegian king. And ultimately, we are talking about the instigator of the most famous world-shifting year in British history. You know, the year 1066.
The big one.
Yeah, the big one. Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to take our sources and really dive deep into the life of Harald Hardrada, a man who's often called, you know, the last great Viking.
And that title, you know, the last great Viking, it isn't just dramatic flair.
Right.
It's a highly specific historical marker. What we're doing in this deep dive isn't just walking through some standard chronological biography.
No, definitely not.
We are examining how an entire historical era, an age of exploration, piracy, conquest, and wandering, how all of that came to a definitive close on a single, fateful English field.
It's heavy when you think about it like that.
It really is. To truly understand this man, we have to connect the dots between the freezing, muddy battlefields of Scandinavia and the absolute pinnacle of wealth and power and the golden palaces of the Middle East.
Sprawling is like the only word for it. And it starts in the year 1030 in a way that is just incredibly fitting for a Viking epic.
Blood and defeat.
Exactly. It starts in blood and it starts in total defeat. We're in Norway at a place called Stiklestad. Our main character, Harald, is he's only 15, maybe 16 years old.
He's just a kid.
Just a kid. But he is of royal blood, and he's fighting right alongside his older half-brother, Olaf.
Now, it is crucial to understand the context of this battle because it really shapes everything Harald becomes later on.
Right, because Olaf wasn't just anybody.
No, Olaf had actually been the king of Norway, but he had been driven out by a massive rebellion of his own people.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, Olaf was a fiercely Christianizing king who was trying to centralize power, and that alienated the fiercely independent and often still pagan local chieftains.
So they kicked him out.
Exactly. And Stiklestad was his desperate, violent attempt to fight his way back into the country and reclaim his throne. So you have this teenage boy, Harald, thrust into the vanguard of a massive, defining power struggle.
And it is an absolute catastrophe.
Oh, precisely. Their forces are utterly defeated. The peasant and chieftain army they crush them.
Wow.
Olaf is killed directly on the battlefield. Now, Olaf would later go on to become Saint Olaf.
Wait, Saint Olaf?
Yeah, a massive figure who helped permanently Christianize Norway and actually became its patron saint. But on that particular day, there was no glory, just failure, mud, and death. And Harald himself is badly wounded in the fighting.
Which is it's terrifying to think about when you consider 11th century warfare. I mean, we're not talking about a clean gunshot wound here.
No, not at all.
We're talking about being hacked by a sword or like a bearded axe.
Yeah.
For almost anyone else in history, this is the game over scream. You're a wounded teenager. You have a literal bounty on your head. Your royal protector is lying dead in the dirt, and your army is completely shattered. You have nothing.
Nothing at all.
But for Harald, this absolute worst case scenario is it's the tutorial level of his life.
That is exactly the right framework. He can't stay in Norway. He is actively being hunted by the men who just killed his brother.
So what does he do?
Well, the wounded teenager is smuggled away. According to the sagas, he hides out in a remote farmhouse to let his wounds heal, and then he is forced into exile. He flees east, over the freezing mountains into Sweden, and eventually travels into the lands of the Rus.
The Rus. Let's define that for a second, because we're talking about the vast Norse-influenced realms centered around cities like Kiev and Novgorod, right? Like modern-day Russia and Ukraine.
Exactly. The Kievan Rus was this massive federation originally founded by Norsemen, specifically Swedish Vikings, who had sailed down the river systems generations earlier. It was a world of dense forests, brutal winters, and these vital river trade routes that connected the Baltic Sea all the way down to the Black Sea. And the Rus lands provided a relatively safe haven for exiled Norse royals, mainly because they shared a deep cultural and linguistic connection.
Right, but Harald doesn't just hide out in a cabin somewhere. He actually takes up service with a powerful prince there, Yaroslav the Wise.
He does. And Yaroslav the Wise was a major, highly sophisticated historical figure.
He wasn't just a minor lord.
No. He was the Grand Prince of Kiev. Under his rule, the Kievan Rus really reached the peak of its cultural and military power. So for a few years, Harald is fighting in Yaroslav's campaigns.
Getting some real experience.
Oh, absolutely. He's fighting against Polish forces. He's fighting nomadic tribes like the Pechenegs. He is learning the brutal logistical trade of war.
Right.
He's honing his skills as a warrior and, perhaps more importantly, as a commander of men.
But while Yaroslav's court was, impressive, our sources make it really clear that it just wasn't enough. Harald's ambition was simply too large to be contained in the service of a Rus prince.
Yeah, he was restless.
Exactly. He starts looking further south, down those massive river networks. He looks toward the greatest prize on earth.
And that brings us to the next massive leap in his life. He leaves the Rus lands and heads for Constantinople.
Miklagard, the great city. I want you to really visualize this because the contrast it's just mind-blowing.
It really is.
Think about Western Europe in the 11th century. If you lived in a major city like London or Paris, it was probably small, it was definitely muddy, most buildings were made of wood, and wealth was incredibly localized.
Very localized.
You might see a stone church here or there, but it was largely agricultural and bleak. Now contrast that with where Harald was heading. Constantinople, which is modern-day Istanbul.
The sheer scale of it would have been totally incomprehensible to someone from the north. Constantinople was the capital of the Byzantine Empire. And we have to remember, the Byzantine Empire wasn't just some new medieval kingdom.
Right.
It was the direct, unbroken continuation of the Roman Empire. The eastern half that never fell when Rome did in the 5th century.
That's wild to think about.
They still called themselves Romans. They preserved Roman law, Greek learning, ancient engineering, and a level of Christian splendor that simply did not exist anywhere else on the planet.
We are talking about a metropolis with perhaps 500,000 people living inside these colossal, impenetrable stone walls, the Theodosian walls.
Huge defensive structures.
Yeah. You have massive aqueducts bringing in fresh water. You have paved streets. You have markets overflowing with silks, spices, and ivory from 3 different continents.
This was the center of the world.
It really was. And looming over all of it is the Hagia Sophia, the greatest church in the Christian world. Our sources mention that visitors literally thought its massive floating dome was hanging from heaven by a golden chain.
To the Norsemen who sailed down the Dnieper River to the Black Sea, this city was, well, it was practically a myth.
Right.
They called it Miklagard, which literally translates to the great city. It was the ultimate destination at the end of the river routes, a place of unimaginable wealth, complex bureaucracy, and just extreme sophistication.
But here's the thing I always push back on when I read about this era. Wait, why would the Byzantine emperor, the ruler of the continuous Roman Empire, the guy with the most advanced military and political apparatus on the planet, want a bunch of giant guys from the frozen north hanging around his incredibly delicate, civilized palace?
Right, it seems weird.
Doesn't that seem like inviting a bunch of wolves into a silk shop?
It does seem counterintuitive, I'll give you that.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating here is the absolute genius of Byzantine politics.
Okay.
To understand it, you have to look at the Byzantine court, less like a traditional kingdom and more like a cutthroat modern corporate board.
Oh, I like that analogy.
It was notoriously complex and treacherous. There were constant plots. You had ancient aristocratic Greek families, the Dynatoi, constantly vying for power. You had military generals in the provinces trying to stage coups. The emperors wanted these Norsemen precisely because they were outsiders.
Oh, because they didn't have any local skin in the game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think about it. A Norse warrior arriving in Constantinople didn't have a Byzantine uncle trying to become a senator.
Right.
They had no ties to local political factions. They had no complex family webs in the city to protect. Their loyalty was entirely transactional, which actually made it incredibly pure.
That's a great point.
They didn't care who the Patriarch of Constantinople was, and they didn't care about local land disputes. They were fiercely, uncompromisingly loyal to the man who held the purse strings, the emperor himself.
That makes so much sense. It's essentially the perfect bodyguard. You want the guy who has zero interest in the local politics to be the guy holding the weapon next to your throne.
Precisely.
So around 1034, Harald arrives in this dazzling city and joins this legendary unit, the Varangian Guard. And I have to geek out about the imagery here because it is straight out of a fantasy novel.
It really is.
You have the Byzantine emperor draped in the finest purple silk and gold jewelry, and surrounding him is a personal bodyguard of towering, fair-haired Norsemen resting massive two-handed battle axes on their shoulders.
The axe-bearing guard, as the Byzantine historians call them.
Mm-hmm.
The Varangian Guard is it's one of the most remarkable military institutions of the medieval world.
Yeah.
They were shock troops, they were bodyguards, and they were utterly fearsome. The weapon you mentioned, the Dane axe, was a massive weapon capable of cleaving a man or even a horse in half.
Jeez.
It required immense physical strength to wield. And Harald didn't just join them, he quickly became their most famous member. Over the next decade, his career is just spectacular. He essentially goes on a Mediterranean tour of warfare.
Right. He's not just standing by a throne looking intimidating while priests burn incense. He is out there fighting.
Very actively.
Our sources show him campaigning in Sicily, fighting alongside legendary Byzantine generals to take the island back from Arab Muslim control. He is fighting in southern Italy. He even travels all the way to the Holy Land, down to Jerusalem, protecting the Christian pilgrim routes and bathing in the River Jordan. I mean, he rises through the ranks until he is the top commander of the Varangians.
He is fighting pirates in the Aegean. He is fighting Bulgarian rebels. He is fighting foreign armies. The exiled teenager who lost everything in the mud at Stiklestad has transformed into one of the most elite, experienced, and feared military commanders in the service of the world's superpower.
It's an insane glow-up.
It really is.
Yeah.
And he was mastering different styles of warfare. In Sicily, he wasn't just fighting other shield walls. He was fighting light Arab cavalry. He was learning how to adapt.
And he is getting paid. Very, very well.
Oh, yes.
But there is this one detail about his wealth that I cannot get over. It is this bizarre Byzantine custom that feels like an absolute cheat code for mercenaries. Apparently, when a Byzantine emperor died, the Varangian Guard was granted something called a looting privilege.
Yes. The term in Old Norse is pollutisvarf. It essentially combines the word for palace with the word for plundering.
Wait, hold on. Let me stop you right there. Does that actually make sense? They just let their own bodyguards systematically rob the imperial palace during a regime change.
I know, it sounds crazy.
How does a functioning society survive if the Secret Service gets to loot the White House every time a president leaves office?
It sounds utterly insane to our modern ears, but you have to view it through the lens of mercenary loyalty and absolute autocracy.
Okay.
When an emperor died in Byzantium, the transition of power was the single most vulnerable moment for the empire. There was rarely a clean line of succession. It was a scramble among the powerful families.
Right, the corporate board is fighting for the CEO spot.
Exactly. The new incoming emperor needed the absolute, unquestioning loyalty of the most dangerous men in the city, the Varangian Guard, to secure the throne against rivals. Allowing them to loot the palace treasury of the deceased emperor was essentially a massive institutionalized signing bonus.
Like a corporate buyout package, but with literal chests of gold.
Exactly. It was the new regime's way of paying out a fortune to guarantee the Guard's allegiance. You let them take the old emperor's wealth, so they will defend your right to create new wealth. And during Harald's 10-year stint in Constantinople, there was an incredible amount of political instability.
Wow.
Several emperors died or were deposed.
Talk about right place, right time. I mean, he goes through multiple regime changes, and every single time he is legally permitted to just back up a truck, or, well, a long ship, I guess, and load up on imperial treasure.
Pretty much.
And he's incredibly smart about it, too. He doesn't just keep it under his mattress in Constantinople. He uses his old connections and secretly ships this staggering fortune back up the river routes to his old friend, Prince Yaroslav, in Russia for safekeeping.
Which demonstrates incredible foresight. Harald knew that the Byzantine court was highly volatile. Keeping all his wealth in the city would make him a massive target.
Right.
If a faction turned against him, they could seize his assets in a day. By banking it in the Rus lands, thousands of miles away, he was securing his future. By the time he is ready to leave the Byzantine service, he is arguably one of the wealthiest men in the entire Norse world.
But before he leaves, there is this one detail that I absolutely love. It is so small, but it is so deeply human.
The runes.
Yes. If you go to Istanbul today, you can walk right into the Hagia Sophia, go up to the marble balustrade in the upper gallery, and look at the stone. And right there, carved into the marble, is runic graffiti.
Over 1,000 years old.
Over 1,000 years old. Some bored Viking, probably standing guard during a 7-hour-long incense-filled Greek liturgy in a language he doesn't speak a word of, just took his knife and carved his name into the holiest church in Christendom.
It's amazing.
The runes translate to something like Halfdan. It's the 11th century equivalent of Halfdan was here.
It's a wonderful grounding detail. We read these grand sagas about massive battles, geopolitical shifts, and golden domes, and it can all feel very, mythological and abstract.
Yeah.
But that graffiti proves the saga's right. The Varangians were really there. A real human being named Halfdan was standing exactly where the history books say he was, feeling bored and wanting to leave a mark. And ironically, his little act of vandalism has outlasted the entire Byzantine Empire.
If you watch the show Vikings Valhalla, they capture this exact Eastern pulse so perfectly. It's a great natural aside here. The character of Harald in the show is incredibly charismatic, and he radiates this destiny for a throne.
He really does.
And the show visually dramatizes this historical current, showing these Norsemen traveling down those river roads toward the wealth of the great city. It gives you a real feel for why a guy like Harald would risk everything to go east. It wasn't just about survival, it was about destiny.
It definitely illustrates the gravity of Constantinople, but of course with that immense wealth and proximity to power comes incredible danger.
Oh, yeah.
Harald had successfully navigated the battlefields of the Mediterranean, but the real danger was the viper's nest of the Byzantine court itself.
Let's talk about that, because the Byzantine court was a nightmare of endless factions, poisonings, coups, and backstabbing. And eventually, Harald gets caught up in it.
It was bound to happen.
The sources are a little murky on the exact charges. Maybe he was accused of holding back some of that imperial plunder for himself, or maybe he just backed the wrong political faction during a palace coup involving Empress Zoe. But the result is that this highly decorated elite commander is thrown into a Byzantine prison.
And this leads to one of the darker aspects of Byzantine politics. When factions clashed, the losers didn't always get executed.
Right.
Executing a political rival could create a martyr or incite a blood feud. Instead, the Byzantines had a very specific, brutal tactic: blinding. They would permanently blind their political rivals.
Wait, I have to ask about this. If the emperor is considered God's representative on earth, isn't mutilating him considered a massive sin? Like, how do they justify that religiously?
It's an excellent question, and the answer lies in Byzantine theology. In their worldview, the emperor was the apostolos, the equal to the apostles.
Okay.
Because he was God's representative, he had to be physically unblemished to reflect the perfection of heaven. Therefore, a blind man could not lead an army, and a blind man fundamentally could not be emperor.
Oh, wow.
By blinding a rival, you permanently remove them from the political chessboard because they were no longer spiritually or physically eligible to rule, and you did it without incurring the spiritual stain of outright murdering them.
That is some dark, twisted logic.
It is. And our sources suggest Harald was caught right in the middle of one of these blinding incidents. There was a palace upheaval, and Emperor Michael Veit was deposed, and according to some saga accounts, Harald himself may have been the one who actually carried out the blinding of the emperor.
Now, we have to put a little asterisk there, right? Because the Norse sagas love to put their heroes at the absolute center of the action.
Yes, definitely.
So whether Harald held the hot iron himself or was just part of the coup is, up for debate, but it perfectly reflects the absolute volatility of the world he was living in. One day you are looting the palace, the next day you are in a dungeon, and the next day you are blinding the guy who put you there.
Exactly. It became very clear to Harald that his time in Miklagard was up. He had survived the politics, but his luck wouldn't hold forever.
Right.
He needed to get out. but the Byzantine authorities didn't want him to leave. He was a highly valuable, highly dangerous military asset who knew entirely too much about their internal politics and troop movements. They flatly denied him permission to depart.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because Harald doesn't just sit there and accept it. He decides to break out by force.
He does.
And he has his ships, he has his most loyal men, but there is a massive problem. The Byzantines had stretched a gigantic iron chain completely across the mouth of the harbor, the Golden Horn, to seal it off. No ships are getting in or out.
The Great Chain across the Golden Horn. It was an engineering marvel. It was supported by wooden floats and controlled by a massive winch, designed specifically to prevent enemy fleets from attacking the city walls from the water, or, in this case, preventing a rogue mercenary from escaping.
Most people would see a giant iron chain blocking the harbor and just surrender. Harald goes full action movie.
He really does.
He orders his men to row his longships at absolute maximum speed directly toward the iron chain. And right before the ship hits the chain, he orders every man on board who isn't rowing to sprint to the very back of the ship, the stern.
It's an incredible application of physics under extreme duress. You have to remember the design of a Viking longship. They had incredibly shallow drafts. They sat high on the water. By shifting all the human weight to the back of the vessel, the bow lifts completely out of the water.
The ship literally runs up onto the iron chain. And once it's balanced there, teetering on the metal, he screams for everyone to run as fast as they can back to the front of the ship.
The weight shifts again.
Exactly. The bow slams down on the other side, and the ship slides right over the chain and into the open water. It is a brilliant, daring escape.
He successfully breaks out of the most heavily fortified city on Earth. He navigates his fleet back across the Black Sea, heads up the river routes into the Russlands, and reunites with Prince Yaroslav.
Back where he started.
Well, sort of. He retrieves his massive hidden fortune, and to permanently cement his political status, he marries Yaroslav's daughter, Elizabeth.
So the kid who arrived in the east with nothing but a sword wound and a bounty on his head is now leaving, and he is returning to Scandinavia around the year 1045.
Quite the return trip.
Yeah, but he is not a desperate teenager anymore. He is a fabulously wealthy, battle-hardened, world-traveling warlord, and he wants exactly one thing. He wants to buy a crown.
And this brings us to the third major phase of his life, and arguably the most brutal. He returns to Norway. At the time, Norway is being ruled by his nephew, Magnus the Good.
Okay.
Now, Harald doesn't arrive as a humble relative. He arrives with ships literally weighed down with Byzantine gold.
Why not just buy an island in the Mediterranean and retire? Like, why walk back into the freezing, muddy politics of Scandinavia?
Because for a man like Harald, wealth wasn't the end goal. Wealth was a tool to acquire power. He felt the Norwegian throne was his birthright. He uses that unimaginable wealth to pressure his nephew.
How so?
He basically says, I have enough money to hire every mercenary in the north to fight you, or we can share power. He forces Magnus to accept him as co-ruler.
Wow.
It was a tense, uneasy alliance. But conveniently for Harald, Magnus dies shortly after in 1046, leaving Harald as the sole king of Norway.
And as sole king, he finally earns the nickname that history remembers him by. Harald Hardrada.
Let's break down that name. In Old Norse, it's Harald. It translates roughly to hard ruler, stern in counsel, or hard in governance.
And we need to clarify something here. This wasn't an affectionate nickname.
No, not at all.
This wasn't his people saying, oh, he's tough but fair. This was a warning. It was a description of the trauma of living under his rule. He was a tyrant.
He was entirely uncompromising. You have to remember the psychology of the man.
Yeah.
He had survived the bloodbath of Stiklestad. He had survived the literal snake pit of Byzantine court politics. He had fought Arab cavalry in Sicily.
He's seen it all?
Exactly. He was not a man who tolerated dissent. When local Norwegian chieftains, the same class of men who had rebelled against his brother Olaf, opposed him, he crushed them.
How exactly did he break them? Because it wasn't just going to war, right? He changed the entire system.
Exactly. He broke their economic and military power. He aggressively centralized royal authority. He took control of the coastal trade routes, the Northway, that gives Norway its name.
Right.
He brutally suppressed the farmers and chieftains in the uplands region, blinding or executing anyone who defied his taxation. He also instituted a royal monopoly on coinage.
Oh, this is fascinating.
He struck his own coins, called penningar, and he actually debased the currency, mixing the silver with copper, so he could stretch his wealth further to fund his massive standing army.
He also founds the town that eventually becomes Oslo, the modern capital of Norway. And he doesn't do it just for the view.
No, founding Oslo was a highly strategic move. It was located in the Viking region, facing south toward Denmark. It allowed him to control the vital trade coming in and out of the Baltic, and it served as a perfect naval base for his ultimate obsession, the conquest of Denmark.
Right. He doesn't just sit in Oslo enjoying his tax revenue. He spends the next 20 years locked in a grinding, exhausting, and ultimately inconclusive war with the King of Denmark, Svein Estridsson.
20 years.
Yeah, he is obsessed with bringing the Danish kingdom under his control. He fights year after year, launching massive summer raids, burning coastal towns, but he never quite manages to conquer it permanently.
It shows his relentless nature. For 2 decades, he is the dominant, terrifying force in the north. He fights massive naval engagements, like the Battle of Niso in 1062, where hundreds of Viking ships clashed.
I read about that.
They would actually tie the ships together in the middle of the ocean and fight across the decks as if it were a land battle. Harold fought on his massive flagship, the Dragon. He won the battles, but he couldn't win the war. Sweden's local support in Denmark was just too deep.
So after 20 years, it's a stalemate. And for a man whose entire life had been defined by staggering conquests and dramatic victories, a stalemate just, well, it wasn't enough. He was a conqueror to his core. So what does this all mean? It means he needs a new target. Harald is in his 50s now. He is incredibly wealthy. He has ruled Norway with an iron fist for 20 years. He has fought all over the known world. But his eyes turn across the North Sea, because a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity has just opened up.
The year is 1066. This is arguably one of the most consequential years in European history.
Easily.
The geopolitical board is thrown into total chaos because the King of England, Edward the Confessor, dies without leaving a clear, direct heir.
So suddenly the English throne is empty, and 3 different men look at it and say, that's mine.
Let's lay out the claimants, because it's a fascinating puzzle. First, you have Harold Godwinson. He was an incredibly powerful English nobleman, the Earl of Wessex.
Okay.
He was right there in London when Edward died, and he claims Edward named him successor on his deathbed. He has himself crowned king almost immediately. Second, you have William, the Duke of Normandy. If you remember our previous deep dives, William is a descendant of Rollo the Viking. William claims that Edward the Confessor had explicitly promised him the English crown years earlier, and that Godwinson had actually sworn a holy oath to support him.
And then you have claimant number 3, our guy, Harald Hardrada, King of Norway. He steps up and says, actually, that throne belongs to me. But hold on, how does a Norwegian king claim the throne of England?
It was based on a highly convoluted treaty. Decades earlier, around 1038, a previous Norwegian king, Magnus, made a treaty with a king named Harthacnut, who ruled Denmark and England.
Okay, I'm tracking.
The treaty stated that if either of them died without an heir, the other would inherit his lands. Harthacnut died without an heir, but Magnus was too busy to claim England. Now, years later, Harald Hardrada is claiming that because he inherited Magnus's throne in Norway, he also inherits Magnus's right to the throne of England.
Which is an incredible stretch. I mean, he is essentially citing a 30-year-old loophole from 2 dead kings to justify an invasion.
It was a thin claim, legally speaking, but Harold had the military might to enforce it. In the medieval world, a legal claim was only as strong as the army backing it up.
Right.
So you have a 3-way standoff. Harold Godwinson is sitting on the throne in England. William of Normandy is in northern France, building ships and preparing to invade from the south. And Harald Hardrada is in Norway, gathering an absolutely massive Viking fleet to strike from the north.
But Hardrada has a wild card up his sleeve. He has an inside man. Harold Godwinson, the newly crowned English king, has a brother named Tostig.
Yes.
And Tostig is incredibly bitter. He had been the Earl of Northumbria, but his brother Godwinson had allowed him to be exiled and stripped of his lands. Tostig wants revenge against his own brother so badly that he actually sails to Norway, seeks out Hardrada, and says, if you invade England, I will help you. I will give you local knowledge. I will give you political support in the north.
It was exactly the catalyst Hardrada needed. In September of 1066, he launches his fleet. The sources say it was somewhere around 300 ships, carrying perhaps 10,000 to 15,000 seasoned warriors.
That's enormous.
I want to contextualize the scale of this. The Viking Age began with small, lightning-fast raids on English monasteries in the 790s, 2 or 3 ships pulling up to a beach. Now, nearly 300 years later, we are seeing the final, massive, state-sponsored attempt by a Norse king to conquer the entire island of England by force.
It's a full-scale war.
Exactly. This is a massive logistical undertaking. Feeding that army alone requires staggering resources.
The invasion actually starts incredibly well. Hardrada and Tostig land their massive fleet in the north of England, near York. And let's clarify why York. York was the historical heart of the old Danelaw, right?
Yes. The Danelaw was the vast region of northern and eastern England that had been settled and ruled by Vikings centuries earlier. The people living there still had deep Scandinavian cultural and linguistic ties.
Ah, okay.
It was essentially a Scandinavian franchise in England. By landing there, Hardrada and Tostig were hoping the locals would be sympathetic or at least less resistant.
And it seems to work. They meet the local northern English forces, led by 2 earls, at a place called Fulford. And Hardrada just crushes them.
Completely.
He uses his veterans, forms a massive shield wall, which is basically a human tank of overlapping wooden shields and spears, and he completely breaks the English line. He wins a decisive victory, and the city of York officially submits to him. He is winning. He must be thinking, I've actually done it. I've beaten the English. I'm going to be king.
He had every reason to think that. Based on the rules of medieval warfare, he had won the north. He expected the English king to negotiate. But Harald Hardrada, the master tactician who had outsmarted Byzantine emperors and survived 20 years of brutal Nordic warfare, made one fatal miscalculation.
Right.
He drastically underestimated the speed, the resolve, and the sheer logistical brilliance of the English king, Harold Godwinson.
Godwinson is down in the south of England, literally staring across the English Channel, waiting for William of Normandy to invade. He gets the messenger who says, hey, terrible news. Hardrada just landed in the north with a massive Viking army and destroyed our northern earls. What Godwinson does next is, well, it's nothing short of a military miracle.
It truly is. He takes his entire army, his elite housecarls, his infantry, his archers, and he force marches them north along the old Roman roads. He drives his men at an agonizing, almost unbelievable pace.
How fast?
He covers roughly 185 miles from southern England all the way to Yorkshire in just 4 days.
If you think your daily commute is bad, imagine force-marching a medieval army 185 miles in under a week, carrying weapons, armor, and supplies, burning thousands of calories a day.
It's insane.
In the 11th century, moving an army that fast was practically unheard of. Hardrada had absolutely no idea they were coming.
He had no reconnaissance telling him that the entire English army was sprinting up the country.
So we arrive at September 25th, 1066, the Battle of Stamford Bridge. The Norwegians are camped out near a river east of York, waiting to collect hostages from the city. They're completely relaxed.
Right.
They think the English king is hundreds of miles away in London. And I love this detail from the sources, even though it's tragic for them.
Okay.
It was a really warm, late summer day.
The heat played a decisive, fatal role. You have to understand the physics of 11th century warfare.
Okay.
The primary defense was a mail coat, a hauberk, made of thousands of interlocking iron rings. It was incredibly heavy, and to prevent the metal from chafing, you wore a thick, padded, woolen tunic called a gambeson underneath it. Wearing that in the blazing sun was exhausting. You risked heat stroke before the battle even began.
That makes sense.
Because they weren't expecting a battle, the Viking army decided to leave their heavy iron mail coats back at their ships, which were anchored miles away from the main camp.
Imagine the horror. You are sitting in the grass near the river, enjoying the sun, wearing just a light tunic. And suddenly, you look at the horizon and you see the sunlight glinting off thousands of spears and shields. The entire English army has just materialized out of thin air, and you are essentially naked.
Wait, you might ask, couldn't they just fight defensively with their shields?
Exactly. Why is taking off a metal shirt an instant death sentence? Couldn't they form a shield wall?
A shield wall is highly effective, but it relies on mass and integrity. Without mail armor, any arrow that drops over the shields, any spear thrust that slips past the wood is instantly lethal.
Oh, I see.
Armor gave you the ability to absorb glancing blows and hold the line. Without it, the line crumbles much faster. Godwinson achieved total, complete tactical surprise. The English army struck the divided, unarmored Viking forces with devastating force.
The battle is absolute chaos, but there is one story that emerges from it that is just the stuff of legend. To get to the main Viking camp, the English had to cross a narrow wooden bridge over the river Derwent. And according to the stories, a single gigantic Norse warrior steps onto the middle of the bridge holding a massive two-handed Dane axe, the exact kind of weapon Harold's Varangian Guard used back in Constantinople.
And he holds the bridge alone. The English army cannot push past him because the choke point is too narrow. They can't surround him.
He's just blocking the whole thing.
He is cutting down anyone who steps onto the planks. It is a terrifying display of martial skill and sheer physical presence. He single-handedly stalls the entire English advance, buying precious minutes for Hardrada to try and organize his panicked, unarmored men into a shield wall on the other side.
He holds them off until one clever English soldier realizes they can't beat him face to face. So this guy finds an empty wooden barrel or a tub, gets into the river, and floats underneath the bridge. He drifts right under the giant Viking, takes his spear, and thrusts it straight up through the wooden planks of the bridge, striking the Viking from below.
It is a brutal, ignoble end to an incredible feat of bravery. Whether that specific detail of the barrel is literal truth or a bit of saga embellishment added later, it perfectly encapsulates the desperate, heroic, and ultimately doomed nature of the Viking stand that day. Once the bridge fell, the English flooded across, and the slaughter began.
And it's funny, if you watch Vikings Valhalla, you see the seeds of this exact moment. A great natural aside here. The show builds the foundation for this fatal gamble from the very beginning. They show Harald's relentless, almost pathological drive for a throne early in his life. You watch his character, and you know exactly where that ambition is heading. The show dramatizes the early chapters of the life that would ultimately close the Viking Age right here at Stamford Bridge.
It's a tragic inevitability. And in the middle of all this madness on the field is Harald Hardrada. He doesn't retreat. He doesn't run back to the ships. He goes into what the sources describe as a battle series, a berserker gang.
Wow.
He is fighting with everything he has, wielding his sword with both hands, but he isn't wearing his mail coat. And eventually a random English arrow strikes him directly in the throat.
The last great Viking dies choking on his own blood on an English field. Tostig, his ally, is killed as well. The Norwegian army is utterly shattered. Out of the 300 massive ships that arrived full of confident warriors, the English showed mercy to the survivors and allowed them to leave. They needed just over 20 ships to carry everyone who was left. The invasion force was completely annihilated.
I always think about that quote attributed to King Godwinson before the battle. When an envoy asked what land Godwinson would give to Hardrada if he surrendered and went home, Godwinson supposedly replied that he would give him 7 feet of English ground, as he is taller than other men.
That is cold.
And that is exactly all Hardrada got.
Yeah.
A grave.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the death of Harald Hardrada at Stamford Bridge is universally recognized as the symbolic end of the Viking Age. The era of Norse kings launching massive fleets across the sea to conquer foreign kingdoms died with him on that field. But the history of 1066 holds a staggering, almost painful irony.
The irony is arguably the greatest in medieval history.
Yeah.
Okay, so Godwinson wins this miraculous victory on September 25th. He destroys the old-school Viking invasion. But remember, William of Normandy is still sitting in France.
Right.
3 days after the victory at Stamford Bridge, the wind of the English Channel finally changes, and William's fleet sails across and lands in southern England.
Godwinson, whose army is battered, bleeding, and utterly exhausted from fighting Hardrada, now gets another messenger. He has to turn his men around and force-march them all the way back down south to meet William.
And just 19 days later, on October 14th, 1066, Godwinson's exhausted army fights the Battle of Hastings, and Godwinson is killed. William of Normandy wins.
And here is the symmetry that makes it so profound. Who is William of Normandy? He is the great-great-great-grandson of Rollo the Viking. He is a Norman. An Englishman destroyed the old kind of Viking Harald Hardrada with his shield walls and axes in the north, only to be immediately destroyed by the new kind of Viking, the French-speaking, transformed descendants of the Norsemen with their heavy cavalry and castles in the south.
It's credible.
The Vikings fell at Stamford Bridge. The transformed Vikings triumphed at Hastings. Within 19 days, the old world ended and a new one was born.
It is the most perfectly plotted script, except it actually happened. So what does this all mean for Harald's legacy? If you look at his complete resume, he is the ultimate Viking avatar.
Yeah.
We've talked about all these different historical figures in the past. He had the legendary, almost mythological aura of Ragnar Lothbrok. He had the conquering spirit of Ivar the Boneless. He raided the Mediterranean like Bjorn Ironside. He wanted to settle and rule a new land like Rollo. And he traveled to the far edges of the known world like Leif Erikson. He was all of them rolled into one single biography.
He truly was. And his end links back perfectly to the Norse mythology we've discussed before. Think about Odin at Ragnarok. The Norse belief was that your fate is fixed by the Norns, the weavers of destiny.
Exactly.
You cannot change when you will die. The only thing you control is how you meet that fate. Harald lived that philosophy to the absolute letter. He was in his 50s, he was incredibly rich, he could have stayed in Oslo, he could have died an old man in bed in Norway.
But he didn't. He chose the bold death. He sailed out, gambled everything, and met his fixed fate head-on, fighting with a sword in his hand. Because he chose that path, he won the only form of immortality the Norse actually believed in. We are still talking about him, sitting here 950 years later.
And there's one final fact about him that just blew me away when I was reading through the sources for this deep dive. Harald Hardrada was not just a warlord, a mercenary, and a tyrant. He was a skaldic poet. He actually composed intricate Old Norse poetry.
And we need to emphasize how difficult skaldic poetry is. It isn't just rhyming. It's a highly complex puzzle-like structure called drotfate. It requires strict internal rhymes, syllable counts, and the use of kennings, which are complex metaphors like calling a sword a bloodworm or the sea a whale road. It requires intense intellect.
And our sources say that on the very day he died, standing on the field at Stamford Bridge, watching the massive English army marching toward him, realizing he had been caught without his armor, he didn't panic. He was actively composing skaldic verse. He actually composed a poem, realized the meter was a bit sloppy, and composed a second, better version right there on the battlefield.
It is a moment of profound, chilling beauty. He is watching his own death approach, and his instinct is to turn that moment into art in real time. It is the absolute embodiment of the Norse ideal. The warrior poet, the man who can cleave a shield with an axe and then perfectly craft a stanza about it. He didn't just live the ultimate Viking life, he crafted his own poetic ending.
What a way to go out. But it leaves me with a lingering thought that I want you to mull over. What if the weather had been just a little bit colder on the morning of September 25th, 1066? What if the sun had stayed behind the clouds, and Harald Hardrada and his thousands of men had decided to put on their heavy iron mailcoats before they sat down near the river? If they had been fully armored when the English arrived, would they have held the line? Would a Norwegian king have marched down to London and sat on the throne of England? And if he had, how completely different would the English language, English culture, and the entire course of global history be today? It all hinged on a warm breeze.
A truly fascinating alternate history to consider.
It really is. Thank you for joining us as we unpack this incredible journey across 3 lifetimes. Next time, we step back to look at the man who actually pulled off what Harald attempted, uniting England, Denmark, and Norway under one North Sea empire, and we'll uncover the brilliant, misunderstood truth behind the famous legend of the king who tried to command the ocean tide. Join us next time for Kenneth the Great. Close your eyes one last time. Let the ringing bells of the great city and the wind over that English field merge together and slowly fade into silence.